Okay, so we're diving into what helps some students just really kill it academically. And we've got this fascinating research, particularly a study of almost 700 medical students, like men and women, pretty evenly split to see, like, what study habits pop up again and again, and the ones who are just performing at the top of their class. So basically, we're going to break down what works.
Yeah, and what's really cool right away is like this study isn't saying if you do this one thing, you'll automatically be successful. It's more like spotting these strong connections, right? These habits that we see over and over in high achievers, like, it's that classic chicken and egg thing. Do top students just study more, or are they like wired to study more because they're already crushing it? But like for us today, right, and for you guys listening, we want to zone in on the actual habits these successful students tend to use and not get lost in the why.
Totally. So basically, our aim here is to give you guys those key actionable habits, the stuff you can actually put into practice and that we see consistently in students who are really succeeding. So let's jump right in. The first one that stood out to me was this whole thing about scheduled study time.
Oh, yeah, and it sounds so basic, right? But for your learning, it's crazy powerful. These top students, they're not just squeezing in studying whenever they have like a random free minute. They actually block off specific chunks of their day just for studying.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit for everyone. Why is scheduling time like that so effective? The study pointed out some really interesting benefits. One is it really helps you just cut out all those distractions. Like if okay, from 2 to 4 p.m., that's my dedicated study time, you're way more likely to resist all the other stuff that's fighting for your attention.
For sure. And like if you think about how your brain actually works, focus and attention are resources that like, yeah, they renew, but in the short term, they're totally limited. Think about adenosine building up as you're awake. That's what makes you tired, right? It makes it harder to concentrate. So when you schedule your study time, you're basically picking those windows when your brain is probably going to be at its most focused. Ideally before that adenosine gets too high, it's kind of like strategically planning when you'll have the most mental energy to actually do the work.
That makes a lot of sense, right? So what's a practical step that someone listening can actually take based on this?
The study strongly suggests, setting up regular study times. It might feel a little weird at first, but honestly, within a few days, your brain and your body can kind of sync up with that rhythm. Like, think about how your sleep cycle adjusts when you have a consistent bedtime.
Yeah.
Your ability to focus can actually become more attuned to those regular study slots that you make for yourself.
Okay, so habit number 2 shifts the focus for you to your surroundings. It's all about minimizing distractions.
Yeah, this was super clear in the study. Those high performers, they were very deliberate about eliminating anything that could pull their attention away. And they specifically mentioned things like putting their phones away. And it was interesting, they often studied alone.
Studying alone now for you listening, that might seem kind of counterintuitive, especially if you find studying with other people helpful.
Totally. And that's super important to clarify. The study isn't saying the group study is never useful, but their data really showed that these top students, they have a strong tendency to isolate themselves when they really need to focus. And that lets them totally immerse themselves in the material without, those constant little nudges from social interaction or, those tempting notifications popping up.
So I think the actionable steps here are pretty clear, right? Turning off your phone notifications, maybe even letting your family or your roommates know, hey, I need some uninterrupted time. The study even mentions some students would like turn off their Wi-Fi if they didn't absolutely need it for what they were working on.
Exactly.
It's all about building that really focused environment for yourself, where your attention isn't being pulled in a million directions, and that lets you get way deeper into the stuff you're trying to learn, almost like creating a mental sanctuary for your studies.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, moving on to the third habit. The study looked at how long and how consistently these successful students were actually studying, and it turns out they weren't necessarily pulling all-nighters every night.
Nope. The data showed that they tended to study for about 3 to 4 hours each day, and here's the key. They usually broke that up into 2 or 3 separate sessions.
So no marathon unbroken study sessions.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's good news for people who, like me,
Hmm.
have a hard time really staying focused for hours on end.
For sure. It really points to shorter, more intense bursts of studying with breaks in between as being way more effective in the long run for actually learning stuff that sticks. It kind of fits with the idea that your brain benefits from those periods of rest and consolidation. Absolutely. All right, habit number 4. This is a really interesting one and maybe a little surprising. It's about teaching others.
Yeah, it's fascinating because even in a setting like med school, which you think would be super competitive, where everyone's trying to get ahead, these top students, they actively tried to teach what they were learning to their classmates.
You would think that would put them at a disadvantage, right? Like giving away all their hard-earned knowledge.
That's a natural thought. But the study actually showed the opposite. The very act of trying to teach someone something reinforces your own learning and understanding on a much deeper level.
Hmm.
You have to organize your thoughts, explain things clearly so someone else gets it, and be ready to answer their questions, all of which really cements your own grasp of the subject.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, to teach is to learn twice, right? The video even connected this to that watch one, do one, teach one concept, although, with a big caution about safety when it comes to like actual surgery and stuff.
Right, but for learning in general, that core principle is the same. When you have to explain something to someone else, you're basically testing your own mastery of it, and you'll quickly spot any gaps in your understanding. And that process of explaining helps you fill those gaps. It's like shifting from passively taking in information to actively engaging with it.
Yeah. Which leads us perfectly to habit number 5, the power of testing itself.
This is so important to understand, and it often gets overlooked.
Hmm.
We tend to think of testing as just a way to measure what we know to get a grade,
Mhm.
but research is super clear on this. Testing is also a crazy powerful tool for actually building knowledge and remembering it.
Right, even those like silly little quizzes you come across.
Totally, even those low-stakes quizzes or just quizzing yourself on the material you've been studying, that's a form of active recall.
Mm.
It forces your brain to retrieve information from your memory, and that strengthens those neural pathways,
Right.
making it way more likely you'll remember it later. It's a much better strategy than just passively rereading your notes over and over.
For sure. All right, moving beyond your immediate study environment. Now, habit number 6 digs into motivation. It's the power of aspirational thinking.
This was a super cool thing. Finding these top students, they often had this long-term, kind of broad, even kind of abstract vision of how their academic success would eventually impact their lives and their families' lives too.
So it wasn't just about acing the next test, it was tied into something much bigger.
Exactly. And that big picture view acted as a huge motivator,
Yeah.
especially when, the day-to-day studying felt like a drag or they weren't feeling the material as much. It gave them a deeper sense of purpose that went beyond just the task at hand.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, even if you genuinely love learning, which I do, there's always going to be some stuff that's just not as exciting. Having that bigger why can really help you push through those drier parts.
Totally. It's like having an anchor that keeps you grounded and moving forward, even when, the immediate payoff of studying isn't super obvious. It gives you that long-term perspective that keeps you going.
Awesome. Okay, last but not least, habit number 7 tackles how we think about learning itself. It's about embracing challenging study.
This is a really important takeaway from the research on how we learn best. Learning that feels challenging, where you
Mhm.
actually have to put in effort and wrestle with the material that's the most effective way to learn.
It goes against that natural desire for learning to be easy, right? Like that idea of osmosis information just seeping into our brains effortlessly, like, that old Garfield cartoon with the book on his head.
Yeah, exactly. And we all want learning to be simple and easy. But the truth is, effort is a fundamental part of building new knowledge and understanding. When you actively struggle with something that's tough, your brain is working hard, making new connections, building those neural pathways, and that leads to much deeper, more lasting learning.
So it's not about always picking the easiest route. It's about actually leaning into the struggle, knowing that feeling of challenge is often a really good sign that you're actually learning something.
Exactly. That feeling of challenge isn't blocking your learning. It's often a sign that real meaningful learning is happening.
I love that. Okay. So those were some incredibly insightful points for you all, taken straight from the experiences of high-achieving students and backed by research into how we learn best. It shows that effective studying isn't just about how much time you put in, it's about the strategies you use and your whole mindset going into it.
What jumps out to you as the most important thing here for our listener to really consider in your own learning journey?
I think that combo of having structured study time, creating that focused environment, no distractions, and then actively engaging with the material, like through teaching or testing, that builds a really powerful foundation. And then on top of that, having that long-term aspirational motivation, that's the fuel to keep you going when it gets tough.
Couldn't agree more. And I think the most empowering thing here is that many of these habits are actually skills you can develop and improve with, conscious effort and practice.
Absolutely. It's not about being naturally gifted. It's about using effective strategies that you can learn.
Which brings up a great question for you, thinking about all these research-backed habits. What's one small change you could try to implement in your own study routine this week to start moving towards more effective learning?
That's a fantastic question for everyone to really consider. Thanks for diving into these top study habits with me.
My pleasure.
We hope this gave you some valuable insights into how to really approach your learning.
Thank you for listening.
And we'll see you soon with another one. Thank you.